The following presentation is brought to you live from Dallas, Texas, for the International Association of Square Dance Callers 26th Annual Convention. This is tape 11. Keep 'em with Patter.
All right, I'd like to welcome you into this afternoon session on how to keep 'em with Patter. The one handout that we are apparently running short of, I've entitled Flip, Kip, and Me forgot to make enough of them. that way I'll stay anonymous. My name is Gregg Anderson. I'm from Colorado Springs, and the description of the session on how to keep 'em with Patter described this session as being staffed by 3 individuals of differing backgrounds. And just in case you were uncertain because of the distinguished panel we've got up here, I am the local caller. I just want to let you know that in case you had any doubts in your mind. We also have with us on the program a fellow who has done festival calling throughout the United States and also around the world as well. Actually started out in music next door. Actually started out in a variety of things. He started dancing in 1958 and began calling in 1960. Actually spent the first few years of his professional life as a high school teacher, and then got into full-time calling for quite a period of time up until about 1984, and then got his real estate license, figured out how to really make some money in real estate. So he's now a fully licensed real estate salesman in Fremont, California. Kip Garvey is with us this afternoon. And also, seated between us here this afternoon, individual who is needs no introduction, so I guess I won't give him one. No, actually, I feel so pleased to be among these gentlemen up here. This next individual who began calling in 1950, or dancing in 1951 and calling in 1952, that a fellow that so many of us, perhaps before we got to know him through CALLERLAB conventions or calling in our particular locale, had established quite a reputation calling around the United States, all over the place, and recording on Blue Star Recordings and more recently on Chaparral Records. A fellow whose name I was not quite sure how to pronounce in the early years, because when I was young and impressionable and in college and dancing, and my mentor Frank Lane referred to him as Flippo on one occasion, and really had a dancer out there on the floor really upset because he was mispronouncing the name, and it lasted for a few moments, words of interchange, and Frank almost had this fellow believing that he was wrong. Anyway, would you welcome, please, Marshall Flippo. There are many aspects of, once we have dancers dancing, how to keep them. And we wanted to focus this afternoon on how to keep them with patter. And there are many things, and if you're running down, letting your eyes scan the handouts, which most people tend to do because it's very hard to hold people back once you give them a handout. They start scanning the page to see what's there. And just to give you an overview, there are obviously many items about patter calling that can lend toward keeping the dancers, keeping them happy, keeping them coming back, whether it be music, delivery style, theming, variety and complexity of the patter, and a whole slew of other things. But I'd like to have Kip Garvey start off with the first part of this program. Will that work, Kip? Oh, yeah, I know I covered it, but I'm hoping you can flesh it out a little bit, as only you can do with your words like epiphany and Mr. Kip Garvey.
Okay. Thank you very much, Greg. We're going to share some ideas in this session, I hope. And we have a portable mic. We'll be bringing it around. And we want to remind you that if you want to say something, please raise your hand or whatever. We'll get the mic to you. Then you can begin speaking so that everything can be recorded for posterity. And when you do, mention your name and the place, your place of dwelling or hiding or whatever it might be. so that everybody can look you up later on and send you some mail. I'm here to speak on the aspect of keeping with patter when you have another caller in an adjacent room calling with the music very loud. Actually, from the viewpoint of the festival caller, I think it's intriguing to know this information. All of us at one point or another will be doing a local festival, a local association dance, and I believe that the principles that are followed by festival callers are also followed by everybody who gets up for a major event in their own home community. I have two words. My first thing that I have to impress on you is that the festival caller is focused on the dancer. I've seen callers and worked with callers before who sometimes are focused on themselves. It's not very helpful to be that way, but it's very natural to be that way. That's just people being people. You're concerned, what am I going to call? What am I going to call next? Ooh, he got such a round of applause. What am I going to do after that? And it's always the I, me syndrome. But when you're calling a festival, you just can't afford to do that if you expect to be successful. And so I put down here as the first category that you want to recognize your purpose for being there. Your purpose for being there is not to impress the dancers with your knowledge, your choreographic skills, if you will, how long you've been calling or anything of that nature. Those dancers are out there for one purpose and one purpose only, which I summarize with this little acronym called CHECK. I believe that the dancers really want to be comfortable, first of all. And by that, we understand that the dancers, when they square up, a different voice, different caller, you need to get them into a comfort zone. So, for instance, you would not want to begin your very first tip with that special sequence that you wrote on the airplane that you just know is going to pizzazz them right into Never Never Land, okay? You need to be able to move the dancers in a comfortable way until they begin to smile and until they begin to show you, with using their body mechanics, that they're entering a comfort zone. And this is all the process of getting the dancers to go with you. They have to be happy. And they have to, in order to be happy, or how can you tell when people are happy? Well, because they become emotionally, they experience emotional release. And you see it. You see it in the way they move their bodies again, and the way they smile, and in their expressions, and sometimes in the way that they're no longer paying attention to you. And this is a necessary thing for you to understand, that when people are really happy, they like to be happy with each other. Not with you, the caller that's up on the stage. They're dancing with each other, and they have a tendency not to be listening to you all the time. And this is not the time for you to say, pull out that tricky choreography, dive through California Twirl. When you know automatically the dancers are in a different mode. They're not really listening to you at that time. And sometimes it's just not important for you to be the center of attention. Sometimes you need the dancers to be the center of attention. Entertainment is the other aspect of recognizing the dancer's purpose. You need to do something a little bit different and a little bit of exciting, but it's like salt and pepper. You can ruin a gourmet meal with too much salt, too much pepper, too much seasoning. And when it comes to festival calling, the dancers are really not there to find out how clever you are. They like to do something a little bit different, something a little bit that they don't normally do. But the theory is get them in and get them out as quick as you can. If you've got something that you want to impress the dancers with, if you have something that you want them to do that's a little bit different, do it quick. Don't give them one of these sequences that seems to go on and on and on forever, and every time they turn around they're in a place where they're a little bit disoriented regarding to the other dancers in the square. A perfect example would be, for instance, something that's different. Okay, couple number one, bow and swing. Walk across the ring and split those two. Separate, go around three. The line of three, go forward and back, and star through. California Twirl. Now you're back in a zero box. Now the calls are not difficult. The calls are all basic calls. But the idea that you're starting out with a seemingly couple visitation kind of a routine by having a single couple go across the floor and around 3. I mean, how many times do you call separate, go around 3? In a festival, the dancers will do this. If it's put in at the right point where you have a little bit of their attention, and then you bingo, bango, bongo, in and out quick. You're back to a 0 box. There's nothing magic up here that you have to follow. No sight calling required. You got a little bit of a module, brings them in, brings them out, and you can even call element left there, or you could move it on to another portion of the sequence if you want. Camaraderie. Now, this is an important aspect. I think that the dancers not only are going down there for friendship, they go to a festival to meet their old friends and so on, but you know the greatest amount of camaraderie is the camaraderie that's established between the festival caller and the floor that he has in front of him. I mean, you can be one with those people, and that's a tough goal. It can be particularly tough if, like, for instance, you're only doing one tip, then you have to move on to another hall and so on and so forth. But if you're doing a session at a festival where you know you're going to be doing 2 tips, 3 tips, 4 tips, that should be one of your goals. Not only are they going to form friends and friendship with the people in their squares, but you need them to be your friend too. That means you need to carry a smile on your face. You need to treat them like you want them to be your friends. And this opens up an immediate communication between the two of you, the dancers and the caller. Kinetics. I think Gloria just did a backflip. Kinetics to me means movement. Those dancers are not there to stand. They're not there to watch another couple dance 18, 24, 36 beats, 64 beats, and then it's their turn. The term I use here is wind in the face. You've got to have choreography that is smooth, that's put together well. It doesn't have to be complex, but it keeps most of the dancers moving most of the time. And it also, if you want the dancers moving most of the time, you can't be tricking them up every 5 seconds with some tricky little combination. So there you have it, the word check. And any time that I step on the stage, these are the elements that I'm looking for. I scan the crowd. I try to figure out where they're at, how they feel, what's going on. Particularly if sessions are changing when you're a festival caller, sometimes your whole crowd changes. You follow Jerry's story into a crowd, into a hall, and very often you'll see the hall sort of empty when he leaves the stage and you come on. And it might be you in the 3 squares because Jerry just took off with the other 40. That's the way it goes. But you have to be just as friendly with 3 squares as you would have been with 40. A little piece of information my dad gave me early in my calling career. You call as well for 1 square as you do for 101. No difference. Now, what interferes with dancers' goals? I use the word break. Breaking down, of course, you can understand what's happening here. It causes discomfort, in certain cases unhappiness. You're not entertaining the dancers. There's a lot of fault finding that goes on. How many times have you heard people come out of a tip that you just called and walk over to you and say, geez, I was in a square with those people and they just couldn't do a thing? That's what I mean by fault finding. Do you know what? I don't ever think that the dancers are criticizing the other dancers that they were with as much as they're criticizing me. I couldn't keep a large majority of that floor moving, or I couldn't keep a significant portion moving. And some dancers walked off and actually blamed the other dancers. I looked to myself first. Now, repetitious material. Okay, material needs to be familiar, but not repetitious. Not at a festival. I mean, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel. Swing through, spin the top, right and left through. You all know the modules. Now, it's difficult for us to have in the back of our mind, perhaps, a lot of different modules. But modules are extremely important, especially at festivals where you don't necessarily want to trust sight technique. Especially if you're in for 1 tip, then you have to pack your stuff up and head off to another hall. You're not going to trust sight calling. You haven't been in the hall long enough to determine the abilities of your so-called pilot squares or your pilot people. So you need to have command of modules. And I think it behooves you to study modules. As long as you're a caller, study modules. And memorize as many as you can. The ones that you can't memorize, you put on a flip card or an index card. Or, boy, I got that from fellow named Frank Lane, when I first heard him call in I can't go back that far. 1963, I think, at Newton Pavilion in Newton, New Hampshire. I said, that son of a gun is flipping cards around. What a great idea. And excessive talking and long explanations in lectures. You're experiencing some of this anxiety right now. People like to move. And you'll see that some of the moderators and panelists here that are sensitive about that will say, okay, 10-minute break, and everybody gets up and turns around and sits back down again. They get going again. The same thing is important with dancers at a festival particularly. They're not there to hear you go on some long diatribe about, where these calls came from and so on and so forth. They simply want the quickest explanation to do what you want them to do, put the music down, put the needle down, get the music going, and you're on your way. Anxiety leads to a loss of confidence. It breaks that camaraderie. The camaraderie is the communication between you and the dancers. You get those dancers suffering anxiety, you've lost them. And they're not going to listen to you. As a matter of fact, they start looking at their watches. Okay, this session's got another 6 minutes. He can do a singing call, and thank God he's out of here. All right? Now, I had your acronym's got to be a nice word that everybody understands, like break, and I had K in there. I didn't know what to call it, so I called it crummy calling. Technical incompetence, poor timing, tempo, diction, inappropriate commands, all adds up to one thing. If you're doing a major festival, whether it's in your area or somebody else's area, and you go out without being technically prepared, you're the only one that's going to suffer. The only one that's going to suffer. It amazes me in my own area in Fremont, where we have newer callers who come to me and say, would you mind if I come over to Keyways Thursday night and call a tip? And I'm shocked. I would do anything to help newer callers, and I do. But I can't for the life of me understand why a newer caller with a very minimal amount of experience wants to get up and call for a highly experienced square dance club after I've gotten off the stage and think that he's doing himself a favor. I don't understand that. And my reply to that is, the next time I get a request for a one-night stand that I can't do because I'm booked, I'm going to call you. And I'm going to give you that one-night stand to do. And if there's any way I can help you in preparation for it, I will. And if you want to take the time to tape it, I'll take the tape and I'll analyze it when you get done and make suggestions. But please don't ask to come and call for my group. I don't think that's right. And I hope you understand where that's coming from. My heart is really with the newer caller, the inexperienced caller. I think a guy can really destroy himself if he puts himself on stage and he's not technically prepared to call. You need to organize your material. How am I doing on time there, Greg?
25 minutes.
I got an hour and what?
25
No.
minutes.
You need to organize your material. Now, this goes without saying, and some of this is highly repetitious, I know, but we need to remind ourselves to do these things. It's not enough to have to think you've got all this stuff in your briefcase, head off to the dance, and then voila, you open your case and something's missing. All right? You need to take the time to open your briefcase before you leave the dance. Make sure you have current lists of the dance programs in there. All right? And you want to know the purpose of every dance and workshop session that you're doing. So you need to get a copy of the schedule. If I'm unfamiliar with a festival that I'm calling, if it's the first time I call it, I need to call my contact at least a week ahead of time. And not only am I going to verify flight travel information and pick up and where I'm staying and all the things that you normally do, but I'm also going to verify my calling schedule. I want to know, what do they expect me to do? Because you get some real major surprises sometimes. You get to these festivals and unbelievably what they've got you scheduled for. You want to use cards and notes to jog your memory. We already covered that, but in preparing your material, you want to make sure those cards are there. All right? I've got stacks and stacks and stacks of these little, I call them memory jogging cards, but I only travel with a few of them. So I want to make sure that I have the ones that I'm going to be using for that particular event. You need to know your material. You need to have memorized figures for each call in the program, including get-outs. Now think about that. How many of you have that? Do you have a memorized call for every call in the mainstream program, including a get-out? I think that's like a homework assignment. Let's sit down and do that. Let's do 5 calls a day until we go through the whole list. And now I've got calls and I can memorize them. And so if my wife says, okay, fan the top, bam, I've got something I can say, okay, I want them to do this, 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 and this, and they're going to get to the corner. If I can tell my wife that, then I know that I can get up and call it. All right? And she listens to me. You need to know the definition of each call. We sort of created a little bit of a monster here. We started CALLERLAB in '74, and we sat down, we wrote the definitions and so on. Do you know we've reached a point in time now where we have a much more sophisticated understanding of our calls than we ever had before? And the dancers do too. They have access to definitions. And they'll walk up to a floor, when you're calling, they'll walk up to you afterwards and they'll say, you called this. Is that really legal or something? I mean, I've heard callers use the typical cop-outs. Well, did you know what I want you to do? Yeah. And did you do it? Yeah. Okay. But that doesn't cut it with me. I need to know what the definition is so that I can give them the answer that they deserve and respect. You need to prepare a wide variety of singing calls. Now, I love ballads. I do a lot of ballads. But I can't survive on a whole program doing nothing but ballads. So I need to have those, the real go-go type things like Flip does all the time.
What a segue.
What's that?
Segue. That's know those words.
Segue.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to
coming up to the end of a segue here.
We are going to segue into Flip because I want something that you said a moment ago that I want to amplify on a little bit. And one of the delightful things over the years, the very unfortunately few times that I've had an opportunity to dance with Marshall Flippo, some of these little things that pop into the dance that bring such a smile to your face, and a few of these things I'd like Flip to talk about. Some of the things that, because of the length of time that he has been calling, we have, the newer callers perhaps, lost some of these little funny filler words that are such an automatic part of his delivery while patter calling. Also, some of the theming that he has done in his patter calling that is perhaps such an automatic part of what he thinks of as his routine, but can add to the dancing pleasure of those on the floor. And Marshall, if you would amplify on some of those items, please.
How did I get up here between two articulate? Is that a good word?
You're doing great. When there was such a plethora of other callers to choose from, is that what you were going to get to?
So some of these words I do not understand.
Plethora is kind of like Texas. It means big, a lot of, to choose from.
Okay. There's a couple of people in here, Nisa Flippo and Melton Luttrell, heard me when I could not call patter. I started learning patter when I was younger. But I couldn't stay on a beat. But with the help of those two and some other folks, I finally got where I could stay on beat. The thing that some things come into my mind all of a sudden, and I had one the other day, and I don't know whether I should still be using it or not, but it seemed to get a laugh. I said, load the boat, and I didn't say anything. It's on a singing call. And it just rhymed right in. I said, swing the old goat. And now I don't know whether they was laughing at me or laughing, but I don't know, Gregg. I really don't know what I do. That's why I don't do any caller sessions or caller schools or anything. I do know that I want the floor to get through 100% if possible on the hash. I have Frank, the funny things sometimes just come to you on a spur of the moment, and you try to remember them. Then later on, you kind of get off of them, and then at my age now, I can't remember what it used to be. You know.
What was the one about the possum?
About the what?
Possum. There's one line you were using.
I had a good friend in Abilene, Texas, named J.C. Wilson. There's a great caller. I seen him call to 15 squares and dance at the same time. He's booming voice, but he had all those Burma shave signs that he stole a lot of that stuff off. That's where I stole them from him, but I asked him where he got most of them. He said Burma shave signs. Remember the Burma shave signs? And what was it? Ida Red, she ain't no fool. She can put a saddle on a humpback mule. Or, if courting in autos is your sport, trade it off for a Davenport. Of course, a Ningo Bingo, sixpenny high, little pig, or root hog or die. Whirligig around, meet your gal, swing her on around. And you know, I get in the pattern, I get a little nervous, like I am now. That stuff don't come to me.
Well, one thing about that kind of stuff, as you call it, when in my earlier years of calling, that's a form of poetry, really. Possum on a fence post, chicken on a rail, meet your honey and everybody sail, or something like that is one of the ones I've heard you use over the years. And those little lines of poetry, as I refer to them now, can be excellent tools when the newer caller is trying to perfect patter calling skills to learn a flow of words. Whether it makes sense, there were many times when I would call, and in the older issues of Sets in Order Square Dance magazine, as it was known back then, where they printed out the entire call, including the filler words, were excellent routines to practice, even if you didn't, whether you were reading them or just using rhythmical phrases like this, were excellent routines to practice to build up your rhythm of delivering words. And one of the things that has become so natural, I think that any of the three of us up here today who have called patter for a long time, is that rhythmical flow of words. And one of the things that Kip mentioned a little while ago when he was talking about kinetics and wind in the face dancing, the flow of the dance experience in patter calling can be greatly enhanced with the music. And a lot of times the patter music that we use would lend itself to that feeling of wind in the face. And that was one of the things that you commented on in our correspondence, Flip, was when we got into patter calling and workshops as to the music that a person might use there. And I'd appreciate if you'd add some comments to that.
Well, I tend to use hoedowns, workshops or clinics that are not, I don't know how to explain it. They're not driving hoedowns, but they're in the background that don't get in the way of what I'm trying to get across. I guess probably I don't know what kind of hoedown you call them, but they're not a driving type. They're more of a smooth type, and I try to use that when I am teaching something, or when I want to get something across, maybe just without turning the music too far down, and I try to use a smoother hoedown. I think another thing too that I try to do is, but I have to be careful because of I want them to get through at least 95 or 100%. If I say, well, you did that with the right hand, now I believe it. Let's try it. I think it'll go with the left hand, but I try to make sure that it's not too impossible for them to do. In other words, I want them all to get through it, and that gives a little variety. On the first hoedown of the night, I try to use a pretty driving hoedown, but as far as just teaching and trying to get something across, I'll try to use a smoother.
One of the, you did a dance in Denver some years back, and I still remember because I researched it that night and wrote it down, and I can't remember the entire sequence, but Kip was talking earlier about quick in and out and avoiding long routines, and you had a particular setup, and you may recall as soon as I mentioned what this is, exactly what the setup was, and I don't even remember the exact setup. But it was one of those things that all of a sudden we had the outside couple doing a touch a quarter or some type of setup. So we were right shoulder to right shoulder, and then we made an arch and backed over the other people into a right and left grand because of the way we were set up. It was something like that. But it was one of those things that, to amplify again what Kip's comment was earlier about quick setups, not a prolonged setup, but it was a total wonderful surprise to the dance floor. And it's those little things like that in the patter calling that I think we try to latch on to, and those little surprises that we find dancing to other callers, where that little surprise, that little nugget of unusual setup that is something you can more generally use in the patter tip as opposed to the singing call.
Well, it was one of the theme type of tips that I used. I had the boys in the center, and I had them facing each other, touch a quarter, make an arch that the girls dive through. And I think I had the girls do the same thing, but they were making arches all the way. I think I started off with a Dixie head lady's chain and send them back Dixie style. And that's just the opener. And the head boys make an arch, side girls chain through the arch and chain back Dixie style. And then slip the clutch, Allemande left. But the other thing that I end up with is, like you said, and it goes right into a right and left grand. And I use it kind of for a theme tip as I try to put some other stuff in between, anyway, I don't know. Just up there, hoping to get through it.
Well, this thought about theming tips, though, that you're talking about, I've always believed is an important thing for a couple of reasons. If you program your patter calls for the evening to do some theming, I think you are more likely to fully utilize the material on that particular program. Most of the calling that I do is at the mainstream level. Colorado is a very strong mainstream state, and that's where I find my expertise and enjoyment in calling mainstream. The choreography that we've got on the mainstream list that perhaps doesn't get the utilization because of people dancing plus in the area as well, spin chain through, I think is a delightful figure. But it doesn't get a lot of play if people are dancing with plus clubs because they've got spin chain the gears and spin chain and exchange the gears. So spin chain through becomes a wonderful one to use for theming a tip. I think theming can probably be overdone, but certainly as a tool to make your patter calling more enjoyable, I think theming is one of those things that is an excellent tool to use. I think it's probably a true statement in patter calling that you have to be careful and not jump in with the real difficult stuff too early in your theme tip. But some callers are much more proficient than I am at knowing what is going to be difficult for the dancer and to be able to progress that theme tip in complexity so that by the end of the patter tip they're doing some things that are probably more challenging than they thought they would be able to get through. But it's because of the skill of the caller in developing that theme tip. One of the other things that I tend to use, and I gather that a lot of other callers don't use, are these filler breaks. I mean, it would be considered a circle break or something on a singing call. And I probably tend to use a lot of those in patter calls, and I think more so than other callers do, perhaps because I've been calling for 35, 36 years, so a lot of this was common back when I was learning to call. But the Allemande bars, and not just from an Allemande bar into a right and left grand, but an Allemande bar with a partner and a shoot the star full turn, boys star right straight across, turn her by the left, leave her there, boys star right in the middle, 3/4 Alaman left, is amazingly difficult for some mainstream dancers to get through. But if I can throw in the correct wording in my patter to try to increase their success, all of a sudden I found I've got a whole different series of things that I can include in my patter calling to add to the, hopefully, positive experience of the dancers, and it's something different because most of the other callers are using swing through, boys run, whatever. So it becomes one more aspect of that. Kip, is there something, I kind of interrupted Kip's outline on purpose because I wanted to throw some of these other thoughts in there, and I'm going to let
It was
him...
a segue.
Yes, segue, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these precise things like the get-outs and theming. Because, after all, you know, when we leave this convention, we need to have something we can get home and call to our dancers, right? So let's see if we can come up with a couple of ideas. You've already heard that Flip likes to do that line thing with the girls. Did you get all that, Flip?
No.
No? And let me add a couple of, like, you can theme a tip around get-outs. I like to do that.
That's what I like.
Yeah. And I think that's what Flip was saying, too. Flipping a... was that a substitute you did to right and left grand or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. And and you know, and so I was thinking right away that he's got to be calling like a substitute to a right and left grand. Well, of course, substitute's not in our program anymore, so let's think about that. If we want to do a substitute to right and left grand, I'm sorry, this is the way my mind works. I'm sorry, but when he said that, that's what I was thinking. Okay, what would I need? I need a 1P, 2P line, a zero line, if you will, do a right and left through, roll away with a half sachet, and square through 2. That sets it up. Now I got to get the substitute in there somehow. All right? And so I would say centers make an arch, and the outsides duck under the arch. Right and left grand. That's what you said, wasn't it? Okay, so...
For the record, Flippo just said that's what I said.
That's what he said.
We want to be sure and get that on tape. See, remember the admonition we had this morning that we have to get everything on tape?
Another get-out that I like to use is from...
Say that again.
Okay.
That was admonition?
From a zero box. Do a right and left through, so now you kind of turn that box inside out a little bit. And I like to use touch a quarter, centers trade, centers run, 3/4 tag to a right and left grand. But oftentimes you can't call 3/4 tag because you're dealing with a mainstream floor or something. And so I will use that same sequence. I'll say touch a quarter, centers trade, centers tag, centers run rather, tag the line until you meet your partner, right and left grand. And if it's worded just like that, bam, they can't hardly miss because the only person left is their partner and they're shaking hands with them practically. And so that's another little thing. For the triple breaks, for the circle breaks, rather. I like that one that you did, and I've used that. I haven't used it in a while. I'm going to use it when I get home. I use triple Alaman, the old triple Alaman figure. I like Alaman left, and the lady star, boys walk around, Alaman left, men star, and so on. Let's see, Alaman left, how does that go? Alaman left, lady star, boys promenade outside. Alaman left, men star right, girls promenade outside. Alaman left your corner. It's dynamic because those stars are real quick. All right, you got promenaders and you've got people moving in opposite directions inside, so you have to almost word it that way. Alaman left and the lady star, the boys promenade outside. Alaman, same girl, Alaman left, men star right, girls promenade outside. Same girl, Alaman left. Great little circle break. Recently, I've been dipping into the barrel of some of the really great old figures. I taught my Plus Club how to do the old do-si-do 2 weeks ago. You know, circle halfway around, break it all up with a do-si-do. And they're having more fun with that. You can shake a stick at. I mean, it's great. And if you set up a zero box, for those of you who don't know the do-si-do figure, it equals a right and left through when you get all said and done. So if you have to start in a zero box, or do a right and left through, now circle halfway around and break it all up with a do-si-do. I'm sorry, you start in a 0 box, say circle, halfway around, break it all up with a do-si-do. Now you're going to pass the girl you're looking at with the right shoulder, and I've taught them to whirl as they go by. So they all do a left face whirl, and then they face their temporary partner for a left-hand turn, and I have them go 1 1/4 almost, so the men just pass each other. Then they can reach out to the opposite girl in that same box, turn her by the right, come back to their original partner, turn her left for a courtesy turn, and they're right back in the 0 box, Alaman left and a right and left grand. And they're having a ball with this thing. Break it all up with a do-si-do. What else? Now, how about the get out that you would use, for instance, that you know they're going to fail on? All right? You don't want dancers to fail, but you should know that there are certain routines you call that they're going to fail on. Are you familiar with the get out, where you do the 8-chain 3 to an Alaman left? It's what I call the across the street line. You get it by starting in a 0 line, and you do a square through 2 and a trade by and a right and left through with the outside 2. Now, at this point, all dancers are in sequence and they're facing their opposite ladies, and you can call 8-chain 3 and Alaman left. But have you ever tried calling it this way? Heads only pass through. Now, I know that the dancers are really going to fumble around on this because you got the number 3 lady facing the number 1 man, and she's got her head turned around trying to find her original partner because the caller just said heads pass through, and it hasn't dawned on her nor him that they're both heads and they're both looking at each other. So you have to sort of help them out with it. Heads pass through, and they look around like this. No, you're already looking at each other. Trust me now, heads pass through. They say, okay. Sides start the 8-chain 3. Right hand, right hand, Alaman left. So a little variation on a very simple and common use get out. Am I really? Did I really?
Wait, can we get this? We had a comment on the floor. Gloria said he's missing something, and then would you, Gloria? Oh, she's just saying, take it again. Oh, repeat the sequence.
Wait a minute, I'm thinking now, because I probably screwed this up, so let me think about it. Yeah, I did mess it up. No, I wasn't using 8-chain 3, I was using Dixie Grand. That's what I was using.
Yeah.
Okay. I was using, why didn't you tell me that, Flip? Okay. You're right, I wasn't using 8-chain 3, I was using the Dixie Grand, which just happens to start from the exact same setup. So, but you got the idea. Randy?
Wait, let me bring the mic down to you, Randy.
Okay, we'll get at you, Randy, as soon as the mic gets down your way. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you. Right. Who are you going to courtesy turn out there? My God.
One of the get-outs that you were talking that Flip was using was not the one that you were talking about, Kip. The substitute one, that's not the one that Gregg was in reference to Flip using, and Flip has probably forgotten it. Because I just worked with him last week.
He said it was the one.
No, that's not the one. He was lying. I think it was 4 ladies chain across, sides, right and left through, and roll away. Heads touch a quarter, make an arch. The others duck under to a right and left grand. I think that's the one that you use, right, Flip? That's what you did last Tuesday. Was that the right one, Flip? Yeah, okay.
I think I might be able to do that 8-chain through. As a matter of fact, I think I can. I got one. Yeah, I got a courtesy turn. If I have the heads pass through that number, well, forget the number, but I got a head lady facing out. And I got sides facing each other. Though they're facing their opposite lady, they're still sides. So they right pull by. Outside man can courtesy turn the lady who did the pass through, while the inside's left pull by, everybody right pull by, Alaman left. I think that'll work. Anyway, those who are buying the tape, pull out your checkers.
Do that again.
The heads did a pass-through. They're back-to-back with each other. Man in the center, girl to the outside of what used to be an 8-chain 2 box. Side boys on the inside facing a side girl on the outside. He starts with a right-hand pull by to start the 8-chain 3. As soon as he pulls her by, he's beside the head girl that passed out, so he courtesy turns her. That's the second hand for the outsides. Second hand for the insides is the center's left pull by. Everybody does a third right pull by?
We need a demonstration here.
We need a demonstration here. I don't, how many would want to see this? I don't know. Do you want to see this? Okay, give me a square. Would you, Del? Guys, I need, and let's make sure we have girls in there properly arranged, normally arranged. Sorry. Okay, and yeah, right now we're forming a square so we can walk this thing, and I need everybody to know.
We got an amateur in there.
Yeah, we. All right, let's see. Which way do I want the lines to go so everybody can see this? Sides lead right and circle to a line. Do that for me. And you're going to be the sides. That's right, Wayne. Okay, now we're breaking out. We have a 0 line at this point, so everybody check corners so we know that that's the corner, so this thing might work. Now let's get across the street with this line so we can set up the opposite lady situation. Square through 2 hands, trade by, and now for the sake of sequence, I have to add a right and left through. Now that puts all dancers in sequence facing their opposite ladies. Okay? Now the head boy, original head boy, is on the outside, and he's facing an opposite lady. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Side man is on the outside, and he's facing an original side lady. An original side lady, but not his original partner. But they're still sides. So you say sides pass through. Heads, you're going to start an 8 chain 3. Right pull by, courtesy turn outside, left pull by, everybody right pull by, and Alaman left. Okay. I don't think there was a conflict with hand usage or anything of that, and it sort of worked pretty good. And by the way, you can also use the Dixie Grand on that too, so you just doubled up on it. How's that?
But that's also one of the things. You folks go ahead and sit down if you like. That's also one of the things that your build-up to that in the patter tip will help ensure the success of the dancers doing it. So, it's no good if they don't succeed. So your ability to realize, to understand your choreography well enough to know what the trouble spots are going to be, to lead them up to that point and gradually give them little nuggets of knowledge, I suppose, or confidence builders as they get toward that rather unusual setup, and or your correct use of words when you're in that particular setup, whatever it is, are going to be keys to the success of your patter tip for that particular item that you were using, that little tidbit of choreography. We do have a microphone out on the floor. Cindy's helping out with the microphone, so if you'd identify yourself, please, and then state your question or make your comment.
Betsy Gata from New Jersey. One of the things I just thought of was you could build up and build a theme, building towards that get out, by setting up the dancers in that same sort of position and have, say, the head start and everybody finish a right and left through. And so that would be, say, step 1, and then you could work towards the get out as you went.
Excellent. Looking toward your choreography as to what the components are, and then building with some other ways to build their confidence in that setup. Anyone else with a question or comment at this point? We'll have time for more later, but certainly if you have any now, feel free to jump in. Up here in front, please. Yes. Just for the purposes of the tape, yes, your name and...
Frank Lane, Colorado.
Used to be Frank Lane, but now he's incognito with a beard.
Flip, I would like to have you tell the folks and tell me, we've only worked together for 40-some years, and I don't know the answer to the question. When you do things that are obviously wrong and get the greatest crowd response in the world with it, you know, square through 3, swing, the girl behind you.
Yeah, well, that was just
he'll put you in a tidal wave, and the boys on knee, and you'll say, "And boys trade twice." I mean, if I started doing this stuff, I'd get shot. And Flip's been doing it. Like I say, we've been working together. I watched him, and you've got a dozen of these things you do, and they're all cute. And if you're going to put them in a book of choreography, they're lousy, but they get great results. Do you have, how much of this do you let yourself do during an evening?
Whatever comes to mind. The square through the thread or whatever it was, swing the girl behind you, came from a mistake. I don't do too much. In the afternoon, in the evening, 2.5 hour dance, maybe 100 of them. And no, I don't. I really don't. I feel like too many of them is. Pretty soon they're beginning to think, well, I want my money back, and so and some nights I don't do any, and then I think later on, well, maybe I should have done some because I didn't call very good that night or whatever. When I'm dancing, and I love to dance, and I found out so much from dancing that a lot of these things I stole because I was dancing, and I thought, well, that felt pretty good, you know, which was really wrong, but it still felt, you know, the darn guy fooled me a little there, you know. But I think you can fool them just so much, and pretty soon it becomes detrimental to you. Is that a word? Detrimental. Gosh, I just wish I knew how to talk. I try not to do too many gimmicks, in other words, through the evening. I've had some luck with them, and I've had some that I wished I had never tried. And you tend to remember those that you wish you'd never tried. You kind of remember those and kind of screen them out so you don't do them again, you know. But I don't know. Some of them come to me by mistake. Now the end from the tidal wave, the boys trade, I stole that, and I stole quite a bit. I was in a very good position at Kirkwood for, this is the 39th year, and I had callers like, and there's some of them in here, Frank Lane coming through 2 or 3 times a year, Meldon Luttrell a couple of times a year, Randy Doherty, and gosh, am I missing somebody that's hadn't called on the staff at Kirkwood? If you call on the staff at Kirkwood, raise your hand, admit it. But you know, I was in a really good position. And I remember the first time I worked with Frank Lane, I ended up crying at the end of the week because I'd done so bad. But I learned so much just observing and not trying to steal too much, but trying to steal a little from all of them. And I told Frank, we worked for over 30 some odd years now, 4 weeks a year and 2 weekends a year. And I told him in Sealamar here a few years ago, I said, had a dream last night, Frank, that went to heaven, and St. Peter said, what good had you done on earth? And I told him, I said, well, I worked 4 weeks a year with Frank Lane and 2 weekends a year with him. He says, come on into heaven, son. Says, you've had your hell on earth. And but he has such great material, and I tried to, you know, we worked together so much, I tried not to steal too much of it because he knew where it came from. But a lot of, and Meldon was so grateful, great for me because he helped me a lot at the beginning. And it's good being there with the guys that know how to call patter, and you see them and you see the success that they have. And I was just fortunate to be in the place I was.
One of the things you said a moment ago I want to focus back on, you talked about certain things you tried that you wished you hadn't. But by the same token, I think one of our keys to constant improvement is to not be afraid of failure. And whether that's in stretching a bit to do a singing call that you might not normally do, or stretching a bit in patter calling. Now, certainly it is much better to have as complete an understanding of your patter that you're going to be using before the dance, but I don't think that should stop you from, if all of a sudden you get an intriguing thought because you see a particular formation in your mind and the dancers are in that position and you call something and it doesn't quite work, I think the dancers are on your side most of the time, depending upon your attitude. But if you've got the correct rapport with the dancers, they will want you to succeed as well. And if you see something that, I didn't do that quite right, let's try it from this perspective. I think as long as you're not afraid of failure, if you're using it in the right way, to go ahead and let yourself go and experiment with some things and let the dancers help you solve some things to improve your own patter skills, I think they'll be on your side, depending on, you don't want to screw up the entire evening, but I think if those moments come, go ahead and seize them to take advantage of them and improve your skills and add to them for the future by seizing the moment. There was a couple of things that I underlined here. My patter calling tends to be very wordy, and my mouth doesn't quit. Even if there's a long time between commands, my mouth usually keeps going because I particularly like a flowing word style. And that can be a problem, I suppose, in a couple of different arenas with brand new dancers who perhaps learn to dance with someone else and then come to dance to you, and they haven't quite gotten used to filtering out the commands from the filler words. And if they don't quite have that skill honed yet, then my rhythmical flow of words, where it's just constant words coming out of my mouth, can be a little troubling for them. So I have to be aware of that if I can by observing the floor or whatever. That became apparent to me truly back in 1994, when I was fortunate enough to be able to represent CALLERLAB at the Mini Lab in England. And we had several of the callers that I had never met before from other regions of the world, from Germany and Sweden and many other places where English is not the first language. And Betsy Gata and I and John Jones, and we had some opportunities to call. And that was an eye-opener for me to realize that for these people that English is not the primary language, my constant flow of words could be a problem if I was not careful. So there's all sorts of opportunities to learn about what is good or what is bad about your particular style of patter calling and delivery. But there are good places to use certain tools and perhaps other places to kind of set those tools aside. Kip, anything else that you have got? I think so.
We're an amazing collection of individuals, square dance callers, and every one of us is a different personality. And you'll see highly successful callers up on the stage that have this pizzazz and charisma and showmanship. But that may not be the way that you want to go. It might not be part of your personality or so on. And I just need to point something out, that there's no person has ever been more successful in this business than Marshall Flippo. And I don't mean this in any negative way at all, Flip, but you can't call him what you'd say a sparkling showmanship type of person up there. He gains his crowd with an unassuming demeanor, totally unassuming. He's got the permanent smile on his face. He knows that those people have to have fun, and furthermore, the more fun they have, the more fun Flip has. I think he's kissed them all. Yeah. Well, if we have time later on, I'll tell you how we met my wife. She sure remembers. But my point my point being that doesn't make him any less sensitive about his calling, or sensitive to the fact that he feels he's called a good dance, or he feels he's called a bad dance. You heard this, and yet I want to make sure that you heard it. We all feel that. We're all sensitive about our calling. And there's more than one way to entertain people. And you just don't have to get up there and sing the most spectacular singing call in the world. You could do it by remembering that your primary function is to be used as a tool by the dancers for them to have fun. And this guy does it remarkably well.
I'm looking at my notes, and there's one other thing that I neglected to mention that I had put on the outline, and that has to do with timing and flow. The singing call part of the program, if we assume that the singing call figure has been properly timed, which this day and age is a great assumption that's not always proven true, then our task is really taken care of as long as we can deliver the phrasing of that singing call. But patter calling is a totally different thing. The timing of the flow of the patter call is solely dependent upon whatever tools you can use to deliver your patter. Whether you use sight timing, I suppose that is a proper term. I think that's what I use when I watch the floor and I'm able to see how much time it's taking them. I don't know that I can tell you how many beats of music certain commands take to do. I mean, I know some of them, but I certainly don't know how many beats of music it takes to do all of the commands on the mainstream list. But I think over years of sight timing and watching the floor, I have learned a metering of words to use, whether or not to add additional words after a spin the top or whatever the command might be, in order to fill some time to allow the proper timing for the dancers to execute that call before I give them the next call. One of the tools that I heard about several years ago, and I believe it may have been Jim Mayo that mentioned this in one of the clinics, was to, if you're concerned about the timing of your patter calling, videotape one of your dances. When you play the dance back, turn the sound off. And by watching the square, you'll be able to notice whether there's stop and go action on the floor by watching the square. And if there's stop and go action, then you have given them too much time to execute the commands. So that is merely one tool to arrive at the source of the problem, in this case, your problem of timing of delivery. But the patter call, whether you're using very flowing wind-in-your-face music, which especially if you're using flowing wind-in-your-face music, like a CALLERLAB on Royal, or one of those just delightful pieces of music that it's so delightful to move to, the last thing you want to do is to botch up the flow of the music by having stop-and-go dancing created by your timing in the calling of that delivery of that patter. So the timing becomes critical to establishing the dancer's enjoyment to the patter calling that you're doing. So we certainly encourage you to work on that if that is a particular thing that you feel that you need some help with. Any other questions or comments on the floor? We still got that wireless mic. We got one down here in front. Cindy, if you'd deliver the microphone, please. Second gentleman right there.
I'm John Elledge from Tabor, Iowa. How many beats of music do you use to take a breath?
How many beats of music do I use to take a breath? I don't know, half a beat maybe? It's quick. But, and there's an intravenous, I don't know, oxygen that, I don't, yeah. That, typically breathing, I don't think has been a problem with me on patter calling. There are certain singing calls that when to squeeze the breath in is very definitely a problem. But patter calling, what the heck, call do-sa-do and then breathe. Speaking of do-sa-do, I virtually quit calling do-sa-do 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And from time to time I have dancers come up to me and say, boy, you call fast. I don't call fast, folks. I think my timing is almost right on. But one of the things, two of the things that may be influencing their perception of that is the constant use of filler words, the fact that my motor mouth is going most of the time, and the fact that I don't throw dos-a-dos in. Dos-a-dos in the patter call, I suppose, are either thinking time for the caller or thinking time for the dancer. But because we have lost dos-a-do as in most of the country as the way it was originally written, and I'm not, I can buy the argument that a back-to-back dos-a-do is uncomfortable, especially as we get older, because you're not holding anyone's hand and you're trusting someone to be going in a proper pattern so they don't run into you when you're backing up. Well, for all these various reasons, I just quit calling dos-a-do, and I don't miss it in my choreography, and I don't think the dancers who are used to dancing to me miss it. I think they achieve more flow of traffic pattern. And another point that I guess I forgot to mention earlier too, on that flow of traffic pattern, especially in the patter call, we really have to watch out for overflow. You know, the feeling of getting screwed tightly into the ground because of too much clockwise movement. Couples circulate and Ferris wheel and sweep a quarter, just any kind of flow that you can imagine that has that person going in the same direction to where it feels like one leg's getting shorter than the other because that hip bone's getting ground to a pulp. Any of those kinds of actions that you're using in your patter calls, like couples circulate, figures thrown in like a chain down the line will reverse that overflow. Or a right and left through in many places can reverse that overflow. So recognize those things as well in your construction of your patter calls, and that merely is based upon your understanding of the choreography. And if you understand and can imagine not only what it is like for you as a caller if you're a man, but what it is like for the woman, because it's not the same depending on what particular maneuver you're talking about. The flow can be entirely different, so try to mentally put yourself in the position of that other dancer to see if you are indeed creating overflow situations or uncomfortable body flow situations that you can smooth out with the correct use of the choreography in your patter call. Any other questions, comments from the floor? Anyone?
I'd like to give you a little example of what happens when you stack ideas up on the dancer and you almost ensure that the dancers are going to at least struggle, if not fail with it, okay? You're sitting around the coffee shop with a bunch of other callers. You say, geez, I just came up with a great idea. Listen to this. Pass the ocean, boys cross run, girls run, wheel around, veer left. What a great way to do a square through two hands. We better get a couple up here. Dell, you want to come up here? I need just 4 dancers. Just 4 dancers, that's all. And the callers might sit around the coffee and set them up like your sides, okay? The callers might be sitting around and saying, okay, let's figure this out. Yeah, you know, oh, that's a super idea. So like after I do heads, do a right and left through, I can use that pattern, and bam, I'm in a 0 box facing the corner, Alaman left. Now let's see what happens when this is actually called on a group of live dancers, and you'll begin to see how the stacking effect comes into play here. And by stacking, I mean you're stacking unusual combinations of calls that cause the dancers to lose confidence in their ability to dance as you're going along. Pass the ocean, that's the first call. No problem there, your dancers won't have any trouble. Boys cross run. Now these dances aren't going to fail for you, but how many of your home club dancers are going to hesitate on that little cross run, having the boys come into the center? Girls run, or ends run to make it even more difficult. Wheel around. And veer left. And they got to go back to back. All right? Yeah, the combination works. What's your success ratio if you call that cold on the floor? All right? You're down into single digits. Okay? All right. But if you guys go back where you were, and And you can see now that you can take this whole idea as your goal. You know, I mean, the tip is what? 5 minutes long. You don't have to do this thing in the 32 beats that it takes to do it all. You can stretch this out through the whole tip. Heads past the ocean. Girls trade, boys cross run, get between the girls. Left swing through. Lady run, bend the line. This is what I mean by getting him in and out. Now, what have I done? I've taken the first difficult element that they knew they were going to face, which is having the ends do the cross run. It's just not normally called. Does that mean we should go home and, call ends cross run? Well, maybe. I don't know. That's not what I'm preaching here. What I'm preaching here is we took the first difficult element and we gave it to them in a spoonful. Okay, now let's do this. Pass the ocean. Swing through. Boys trade, girls run. Girls trade, girls run. Boys run, bend the line. All right? So now we took the second element, which was having an ends run, and they happen to be running in a counterclockwise direction, which, again, is a little bit different from the direction we normally have a dancers running in. Normally they're running clockwise because we normally deal with right-handed setups. So now the second element has been solved. Okay? And then the third element was the wheel around. Well, a wheel around out of a two-phase line is something that's kind of weird for our dancers normally. So you just don't call it cold. You say heads pass through. Wheel around. Forward, girls. Back up, boys. Flutter wheel. Sweep a quarter. Veer left. Ladies trade. Girls around the buoy. Wheel around. Boys trade. And eventually, after this, you could bring them back out again. But I think you see my point. And then you're going to have one more stumbling block, and that's doing the veer left from the two-phase line, which, according to the definitions we all know, requires dancers to step forward as they do their veer. And you would take that out as a separate element and call that in a separate sequence. Now veer left. And then you've got it. Okay? Thanks, guys. You can sit down now. I just wanted to do that. But yeah. Okay, hang on a minute. Hang on. Wait a minute, Frank. Let's bring the mic around because the folks at home want to hear this, too.
A while ago, you were talking about incorporating the do-si-do into your programs, and it resulted in a circle half. And I would have to take exception to you. In the old days, it did not result in a circle half. But would you show us how you're introducing do-si-do to your dancers? Because I'd like to see it.
Just for the tape, he said, I hate it when Frank says these things. That means I'm doing something wrong. Get the microphone, if you would, please.
Whenever I teach my dancers, especially a figure like this, I'm on the floor with them, doing it with them, okay? So what I want you to do, Anne-Marie, is as we pass each other, I want you to whirl to your left, okay? Pass me and whirl to your left. All the way around. That's it. Okay, that's all we need to do. Now make sure that when you pass each other, you whirl to the left. Actually, I teach this later on. I don't do this right off the chute, but I want to show you everything that I said I did. So we circle halfway around, and we're going to break it all up with a do-si-do. So we pass through. You do that little whirl to the left till you're facing your partner. You turn your partner left and keep turning until the boys are coming almost past each other. Then you reach to your opposite. Take your opposite by the right. Turn your opposite by the right. You come back, turn your partner by the left with a courtesy turn. Full around. Okay? It comes out. Now, yeah, it is a little bit different. What I've added to this from what I've read in literature is the extra little half a turn with the partner, because the original do-si-do says face your partner and you touch left hands and let the girls move around the boys, until they get behind them. Then you reach to your opposite for the right. I didn't like that idea. I thought... And besides which, no one's doing do-si-do, and my dancers aren't going to go out and hear it anywhere, so I just added the extra turn and a half so that the men could go by each other and turn the opposite by the right, more like a Suzy Q feel than anything else. But that's what I was doing with the old do-si-do. The point is, I do it at home, I do it with my dancers, they have a lot of fun with it, and the theme here is keep them with patter. And if I'm calling my dancers once every week, I want them to have something a little bit different and exciting. And this is very traditional, too. It's got some deep roots. this do-si-do. And that's why I do it, and that's the way I do it. Yeah. Here's your mic.
You said that you never heard that. The dancers never hear that. They do hear it, but the callers don't mean it. The callers say do-si-do, and they mean do-sa-do. And I'm on a single-person campaign against that, I guess, but I'm teaching the do-si-do, and I'm putting pilot squares in front of callers that use it. I'm waiting for them to use it, and I want them to do it. And when they do, the caller's going to go, no, 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 and I'll say, but that's what you said.
One of the things that we perhaps didn't, we alluded to, I think, in the first part of the program, is the use of music. We have such wonderful music nowadays to use for patter calling, so many different sounds, and obviously it's a question of finding a particular sound that fits your delivery style. I've heard some patter records that callers have used, and I thought, man, what a great record, and I get that record, and it doesn't suit my calling style. So you have to be able to understand what fits your calling style, but because there is such good music out there, you want to use variety. It is possible this day and age, even on the same record label, to get different sounds, but you can also, on the same record label, have very similar sounds. So because you've got so much possibilities of choices, go ahead and have a different band join you on the stage for each patter tip. Don't have the same band come back tip after tip to join you on the stage. You've got all that variety, so use it. So make sure you get a lot of variety in the use of your music. How many of us ever use singing calls as patter records? Almost all the hands went up. I likewise do the same thing. There are certain singing calls that for me didn't really cut it as a singing call, but make an ideal patter record. But I think we have to watch that we don't overdo that as well. I was on a business trip once up in the Pacific Northwest and checked the local listings and went out to a dance one night, and every single patter tip that evening the caller used a singing call for the patter record. And I thought that was a little bit overdone to my personal taste. But it's certainly, there is some wonderful music out there to be using for patter records. We have, I think, entered an era where some of the patter records are so unique that a couple times in the last year I've actually had dancers come up and request a particular patter record for that evening, which was a totally new phenomena to me the first night that it happened, and luckily I had the particular one they wanted. I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. I mean, that's delightful when a dancer, when you're in one more fashion able to please the dancers out on the floor. I hope the other dancers enjoyed it, but I know she certainly did, because it's a particularly enjoyable piece of music for her. So there's all these things that we've talked about this afternoon that can hopefully allow you to keep the dancers enjoying the patter as you present it at your programs, whether you're doing it like myself as a club caller, whether you're doing festivals like Kip does, or whether you're traveling around the country or doing the Kirkwood vacations like Flip is. So there's all of these tools that we hope that you've gotten some enjoyment out of. You've learned a few things. If you missed them as they went by, it is on tape, so you'll be able to acquire that tape to kind of rehash it, no pun intended, later on. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Flippo's got one closing comment.
I'd like to thank, I think we should give Gregg a big hand. Your session the other day on One Night Stands, and this session too, you've done so much work on, and we appreciate you very much. Same to you, Kip.